All right. Thank you all for your patience. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're dialing in from. It is my pleasure to moderate this webinar. And I want to put shout out to all of the participants. This is a jointly produced effort between the IAB, CVS Media Exchange, and Goodway Group and G-Comm. So thank you for joining us. The topic today we're going to talk about is proving retail media's worth. As I'm sure many of you already know, this is a hot topic and a discussion. So what we've decided to do is bring together stakeholders to address this evolving landscape around retail media measurement. And the approaches in retail media remain relatively diverse. The IAB, represented today by Angie, they're making significant progress in standing up standards with its set guidelines of a meaningful and crucial step as we move forward into the landscape and continuing technology, the evolution of technology and best practices. So this session will cover off on the IAB standards, the implementation of those standards by our friends at CVS Media Exchange, and how Goodway Group and G-Comm are also navigating the landscape for the benefit of its clients. So without further ado, let me introduce my co-participants today. Angie Eng, she's the Vice President of Measurement, Addressability, and the Data Center at IAB. Drawing off of nearly 30 years of experience, her executive leadership has helped to shape the digital advertising standards and the landscape, earning her multiple industry awards for her pioneering work. Angie, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Exciting and nice to see everyone again.
Thank you very much. We also have Gretchen Reisner. Gretchen leads Client Insights and Strategy at the CVS Media Exchange, also known as CMX, leveraging over 15 years of strategy and measurement experience. Her time at CMX and prior roles, she's developed deep expertise in campaign strategy, reporting and measurement innovation across retail media and marketing. Gretchen, happy Friday. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. Always excited to talk retail media measurement.
Awesome. And then finally, Daniel Cinquegrano from Goodway Group's G-Comm division brings 14 years of digital media analytics expertise to his role as Director of Analytics and Data Insights at Goodway Group. And his prior experience has centered on data-driven strategies and measurement frameworks that help major brands optimize their retail media investments. Dan, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you so much, Joe. Happy to be here and excited for a really interesting discussion.
Excellent. So without further ado, I'll kick off. We're going to set the stage and sort of lay out the current landscape. So I'm going to direct my first question to you, Angie. How does the IAB see its role in driving standardization? And now I'm thinking here about both in-store and online retail media measurement. It's certainly a hot topic today, and certainly in the focus of a lot of the folks probably watching today.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of standards, we're going to continue to, I think, first step was around the measurement guidelines that we did in partnership with the MRC. But included in that, we've really been focused on not only just the measurement guidelines, but also helping to educate and guide the industry on how do we unify the rest of the market with consistencies and standards. So we've been doing a lot of work around in-store and digital out of home, because those are key components and key new innovative solutions and advertising opportunities for brands and agencies that we found. And we're going to continue that work. Most of the stuff that I think we're going to be focusing on moving forward is not just retail media, but overall the commerce landscape, and especially kind of where commerce and retail media networking systems kind of come together. And that also includes the ad tech and the MarTech collaboration and interoperability between those things, as well as signals through the supply chain.
That's a huge project. Gretchen, this obviously gives you and the folks at CMX a lot of food for thought. How are you incorporating the guidelines and also addressing some of the more unique challenges, like things like data sharing and transparency in retail media? We'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I think, CMX pretty much immediately put into some of those guidelines right away in terms of being able to do attribution by viewable impressions and making sure that we were aligned on some of those standards. We also took into account like some of the metrics that were preferred that we should be reporting on, made sure that we updated and refreshed our dashboard with things like new to brand buyers, total volume of buyers that are happening through campaign exposure. We refreshed that in July just to create more robust reporting based on these guidelines. But what I think the greatest thing about the IAB guidelines that came out is it allowed for the flexibility for each of the retailers to still kind of operate within their own data sets, right? Every retailer has a different kind of set of deterministic data or model data. How their shoppers shop at those retailers is a little bit different. There's different trip cycles and purchase cycles, and we all carry slightly different products. And these guidelines really allowed for us to have that flexibility, not only to align with what worked best within the data that we have, but then also allowed the flexibility as we start thinking further forward out, and we need to think about how are we doing better omni-channel measurement, as we just talked about, in store versus online, as we move forward.
That's great. And I mean, these efforts to make the very complicated simple, and we're going to put a pin in future state because we're going to come back to that towards the end of this conversation. Dan, from a digital first perspective, based on what Gretchen just said, how are you ensuring alignment between client expectations and the frameworks themselves?
Yeah, alignment's extremely important, Joe. So as an agency, we support our client partners across a wide array of RMNs. So our team is really well versed in the similarities and differences between all of them when it comes to measurement. Now, we educate our client partners on these nuances, and based on their business objectives and KPIs, we're there to provide guidance on which networks are going to be best suited to meet their goals and KPIs and provide support where they need it to ensure that they are indeed met. So we're doing everything we can to provide a consistent view across networks. Knowing there's a lack of standardization for the most part, we're there to provide consistent data in a single place where they can view all that performance at once to get a true read of how the media is impacting their brands. And we're also there to help interpret the results and provide those key insights and actionable recommendations. Every result teaches us something, even if it isn't the result we want. So we provide flexibility and customization based on what the client needs, and we're sensitive to all the commonalities and the uniqueness of what brands want, so we can adapt to both.
No, that's great. It's making the complex more simple in those efforts, but then also kind of bringing together a bigger story for the benefit of suppliers. So back to you, Gretchen. Thinking about how your team, how does it create a unified view of the in-store and online media performance?
Yeah, CVS has a very strong loyalty platform with almost 70% of all of our transactions traceable back to our loyalty campaign, which makes us have this really rich, deterministic, traceable sales set. And it allows us to understand who is seeing this media online, who is it seeing it on our site, our ONO properties, our offsite channels. And then as we think forward and we expand into in-store channels, even at a transaction level, we'll know from a timestamp when maybe some of that in-store media was done, and then what transactions also occurred with those extra care loyalty IDs, and allows us to really provide a robust, singular view of what is happening with that shopper and what's going on with their shopper journey and what is the ultimate performance from that.
So across the journey, this is really important because bundles of tactics serve to kind of reinforce that journey and provide an end result that's actually measurable and readable. Angie, back to you. What examples can you share where the guidelines help brands and retailers achieve sort of better omni-channel measurement in light of the customer journey and the complexity associated with it?
Well, a lot of it focused, I mean, Gretchen mentioned many of them, right? But it's really, I think one of the things that was really important is, the opportunity to be seen or viewability, and making sure that how, in terms of when it comes to measuring outcome, that it's filtered out for fraud and that the ad was in a viewable state. And that encompasses all channels, right? So it's not just the digital channel, but it's also think about in-store, making sure that there's persons available. There was one thing I think we had talked about was that if the cameras in the store or the store was closed and it was after hours, that any ads that were served during that time frame should not be counted as an impression. So we took really, a lot of thought into mind about different use cases and different scenarios, and figuring out, especially with the retailers having first party data, and that's where a lot of the benefit comes in, especially with loyalty cards, how to connect when a person sees an ad or it is viewable to measuring it towards outcomes. There are several different metrics. Well, I mean, we went through all the different, ROAS and ROI and cost per customers and all of that stuff. Um, I feel like there was over like 200 metrics that reported out in the guide, which, as Gretchen had mentioned, really offers the flexibility for retailer to really identify which KPIs and which metrics are at minimum buyers are looking for, but also the flexibility to also select certain metrics that they may have capabilities of measuring that some other partners might not be able to.
No, that's interesting. So it's the complex to the simple to abundant choices in terms of understanding customer behavior. Dan, Angie mentioned first-party data. I'm wondering if you could talk about connecting the dots between the in-store behaviors and the online campaign performance across all networks and maybe the role data plays in that.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of retail media, right? Tying online to in-store. So for us, that does start with that first-party data that we're talking about and the integration of that, not only on our side as a brands partner, but also with the retailers so we can understand their loyalty and sales data down to the most granular customer level. So with those data integrations, we can tie back digital media activities to in-store behaviors, and that allows us to understand incrementality and who the customers are and where they're shopping across the retail spectrum. So our brand partners are very diverse, like we touched on before. We understand the types of engagements our brands have with each retailer, like SKU assortments. Brands may have full lines at some retailers versus partial lines across mass market or dollar or grocery. So their media and in-store activations will vary based on the different type of retailer that they're operating with. So on top of that, from a practical application standpoint, we look at things like media mix and scenario modeling. So that means we're combining these two things together, which helps us see what has been historically done in the marketplace over time for the brand, which helps us understand how the retail channels are working together for the brand. But then we can look at opportunities with those retail channels, like identifying ones that we've maxed out versus retail channels that give us more opportunity to spend additional budget efficiently, and a forward-looking analysis through scenario modeling.
I think that's really, oh, sorry, Angela, go ahead.
Yeah, and Joe, I'd like to cover, and I had to reopen the document, but what's interesting about the guidelines as well is that we don't just talk about the metrics and the definitions, but we also go into things like synthetic control and market testing, data modeling and statistical modeling, and then when you're using machine learning. So we actually go in depth into understanding that there are various different approaches in which retailers can measure to outcomes either deterministically or probabilistically, and how companies should be approaching incrementality and overlap. So I just want to, it's not just impressions and clicks and then outcomes, but there's a lot of stuff that's happening in between that that enables a lot of the retailers to engage and interact with their brands with different types of reports in terms of how they want to see that data structured.
No, and that's really important, I think, too, because defining a customer journey is the sum of tactics, techniques, and harnessing data really well. And that actually leads to a really good next question. Dan, I'm going to turn it back over to you. You talked about the implementation of first-party data and understanding sort of trend-wise how to spend dollars efficiently. I think that's really at the crux of a lot of the discussion around retail media measurement. Can you share an example of how Goodway and G-Comm has helped a client improve its strategy by bridging that sort of digital and offline insight world? It's, again, to Angie's point, you've got a lot of different ways to think about it. We'd love to hear a practical example of how we've done it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll use one of our CPG brands in the baby category as an example. So this particular brand is scaled across RMNs with a lot of activity over the past few years. So we took 2 years of their historical data across the 7 RMNs that they've most prominently been active on over that time period and built models to help us understand areas of opportunity with these RMNs, like where we can expand and grow, or maintain, or maybe even reevaluate investments if we see that there's a potential of hitting points of diminishing return. So the output for this CPG partner with these analyses was really clear, and it helped us enable smarter buying and fine-tuning their budgets. And what we found was that there were RMNs and specific tactics within them where the brand still had substantial potential to grow. And there were some where we determined that investment should remain flat or be reduced due to hitting those diminishing returns. So ultimately, these insights lead to meaningful revenue growth for our brands and helps them further build their business across the retail spectrum.
No, that's really important. And I think the role of insights. Now, Gretchen, this is directly in your title and your wheelhouse. Can you talk about the role that so critical first party data plays in delivering actionable insights for your clients in their campaigns?
Yeah, that loyalty program and all that deterministic data set that we're sitting on at CVS, it really allows us to better understand not just sales or incremental sales driven from CMX campaigns, but also details, as I mentioned before, about how many total buyers, how many new to brand buyers, what were those media influence brand buyers also buying, what other categories, what other brands were getting put into basket. How was my new to brand buying shopping behavior and maybe SKU that they tended to purchase different from my current brand buyers, and what were they more likely to purchase? All of that data can really deliver strong insights, but also inform how should we think about the next campaign? How does this impact our targeting decisions moving forward? Even what do we do with a creative? If I'm doing more of an acquisition campaign, maybe that new to brand buyer shopping behavior and what they're more likely to purchase, that product is the one that needs to be featured and really drive that instance and deliver that performance in that KPI for our brands.
No, that's again super important to understand, and providing the insights leads to strategies that lead to better outcomes. So I said at the outset, I put a pin in the idea of sort of future state. Now I'm going to start teasing it out. And Angie, I'm going to start with you. Thinking about emerging technologies, the other word on everybody's mind, in addition to measurement, other words besides measurement and incrementality, is AI. So thinking about emerging technologies, can you give a perspective on how these developments will shape the application of retail media measurement standards and best practices across channels?
Well, I think AI, if you haven't been reading the trades around the booming transformation of our industry with AI, you should start reading a lot about it. I think there's a lot of implications from a variety of standpoint. One is up until now, the programmatic industry has been using machine learning to help optimize bids in the bid stream. But I think with more advanced capabilities coming from AI, you're going to now see recommendation engines and the ability to kind of do a lot more scenario planning that will enable it to optimize based off of life events, current events in real time. So if it's raining, without having human intervention, it could actually bump up the inventory for a particular brand that wants to sell umbrellas, let's just say, or hot chocolate. And that's going to really enable them to really generate a lot more sales for those types of clients because it's relevant at that time. But also, I think from the back end, when it comes to insights and recommendations in terms of media mix planning, in terms of helping to, quote unquote, what I say, fill in the gaps, especially around those channels that don't have very strong conversion data. As you know, mobile devices, like with Apple, tracking is a lot more difficult. Things like digital out of home, which we just got out of a meeting yesterday with the digital out of home committee at IAB, and a lot of their challenges is around how to ensure that they too get their fair share of attribution when it comes to exposure in the store. So I think AI is going to help with a lot of that. And then thirdly, in the category of creativity, think about how it's going to be used on screen, not only for digital, but perhaps even for print and radio and so forth, around creating different types of ads that maybe cater to different areas of the store or even outside the store.
No, that's really exciting work, and that future state is absolutely something we want to touch on, and we discussed as we were putting this together, because I think we would, we're doing, this is good work, and we need to think about what future state looks like, because I think folks watching this now are starting to plan for all this. So Dan, kind of looking at what we do today at Goodway and G-Comm, can you talk about some of the innovations that you're focusing on to equip clients for the future based on what Angie just shared? It sounds like it's the simple to the complex to the abundance of choices, and now moving into the future state. How do we help clients navigate that?
Yeah, so very top of mind for our product teams. So we know retail media networks are very diverse when it comes to targeting and measurement. We talked a lot about that. Anyone who's familiar with the space sees that on a daily basis. So one of our highest priorities is to work with our brand partners to help level set the playing field for them, so they can understand where their dollars are being spent most effectively and help them plan where they should spend that next dollar. And our solutions roadmap prioritizes this. So we're looking forward to continuing to evolve. That's top of mind, our current measurement solutions, and we have some new innovations that will launch in 2025 to help brands level set their performance and gain deep insights to make those business decisions. So stay tuned for updates there from our channels.
No, that's super exciting. And, kind of thinking of that propulsion forward and evolution. Angie, back to you really quickly. How is the IAB ensuring that the measurement guidelines remain relevant? You have a big body of current and very active members. Talk a little bit more about that. How are you keeping a pace as retail media itself continues to evolve?
Well, I will give kudos to companies like CMX or CVS and many of the retailers that are now IAB members. If you had asked us about 3 years ago, many retailers were not IAB members, and it's really important that we continue to not only expand with retailers but also just the general commerce space, and ensure that we're hearing from I'll say the sell side on what some of the challenges that they have with regards to getting on the media plan or friction within the supply chain. And so we have a retail media network committee, but we also just launched, as of January, a commerce board. And this doesn't include and CMX is now part of that, as far as I heard. But we have brands, agencies, publishers, ad tech companies, measurement companies, part of this board, which will help us define what our roadmaps are. We already have some feedback on the things that they want us to focus on for next year, which is really around composable media and standardization in the programmatic supply chain.
Wow, that's great. So this is a huge village community effort to kind of keep this moving forward so that everybody benefits. Gretchen, this is really telling and interesting stuff. Thinking about some of the other things that are very much top of mind, no doubt, for companies like CBS and CBS Media Exchange. How are you preparing the measurement frameworks to handle these trends? Especially thinking of things like shopper privacy, very topical issues and important to preserving the relationship with your customers.
Yeah, I think, CVS takes their loyalty platform and their shopper privacy very seriously, even as they are the backbone of a lot of our advanced insights that we can provide. But there's always the options and the framework for them to choose to share or not share their data for that kind of personalization that we're able to provide. And then I think if you think a little bit broader out in terms of that patchwork of different state legislations and requirements that are there going on, since we don't have a federal kind of privacy thing, I think it's important that we remain flexible with how we report on performance and define performance. Like today for incrementality, we're using a randomized control holdout methodology, really at a consumer and shopper level. But I think it's important, not only as we look at additional channels, but as we look at how privacy legislation may evolve, that we stay flexible in that, and that we look and make sure that we've got the right geo-based or store matching incrementality methodology, maybe even time series, as we look at those kind of statistical tests that we can do, just to make sure that we are meeting the market and staying with the industry, but also still meeting back and being able to report on performance for our brands.
I think Gretchen brings up a really great point, and to answer, there was a question that came up through the Q&A around interoperability and visibility between RMNs, is that, although there's this robust first-party data that many of the RMNs can actually attribute to exposure to conversion, that when it comes to incrementality and interoperability, we do have to keep in mind privacy by design, right? Cross-channel measurement, cross-platform measurement is kind of being challenged by regulators, not only within the US, but also globally, around how we can share data, and what is considered sensitive data, and the ability to process those opt-ins and opt-outs. So we do need to keep in mind that although things like AI are great to kind of help, quote unquote, fill in those gaps, that getting to this nirvana state of cross-platform, cross-channel measurement and really having accurate measurement, that is going to be in the eyes of the beholder, unless you can really prove statistically the significance at 90% that all the attribution is correct. But you have to test out different models: first touch, last touch, assisted attribution, unassisted attribution, and all of that.
No, that's really important to note. And in fact, that same question, Dan, that was kind of directed, thinking about how you're reporting on different RMN performance, considering the operability issue. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah. So it's really coming down to the standardization that the IAB put into market. Interoperability is something that's always top of mind, and we were collaborators on it. We know the best practices are for more standardized view across the RMN landscape, and we're huge supporters of that, because once we have a consistent view of that data, and a consistent view of the customer, that's where we can really unlock things like incrementality, where brands can really understand the effectiveness of their media.
So it's about the application of standards and bringing those standards kind of globally across the industry, and that's actually a nice way to start, heading towards one of the other finer points we wanted to make today, which is really talking about industry collaboration. So to each of you, and we can go around. Angie, you can start, then to Gretchen, then to Dan. Let's talk about where the opportunities are to continue to improve. Like, talk about that value of collaboration.
Well, it's really important at the IAB that we consider ourselves a tentpole, member-based organization where we bring together agencies, brands, ad tech companies, measurement solutions, publishers, all under one umbrella, and continue to identify what are the needs of the industry, and through working groups and task force, put those outputs in the marketplace, as well as generating research around what's needed to enable to provide insights to our to the different cohorts in our industry on what things that they can do to help grow their business. One of the things I think that we're also looking at is what is the future state, and knowing what are the different channels and opportunities are. Again, digital out of home seems like a really great fit when it comes to in-store. So there's a lot of conversations right now around in-store and digital, especially with digital out of home. But I think you're going to see that also extend creator economy, and how retail media networks are going to be leveraging creator economy, as well as environments like podcasts and AR and VR. So it'll be interesting to see, some of the new opportunities that the retail media networks come up with in terms of expanding their footprint outside of not just the store inventory from their store and their O&L and on websites and apps, but also different devices and environments.
That's great. Gretchen?
Yeah, I think transparency is going to continue to be the key moving forward. Every retailer, as we've already kind of talked about, has kind of nuanced data sets, nuanced shopping behavior in terms of how shoppers shop at their retail establishments, and why and when they visit, but by being transparent with how sales are attributed, and especially what percent of that sales attribution that we're reporting is modeled, is super important to contextualize that data. It's also offering our suppliers flexibility. How do we look at the different SKU groups? Are we just looking at kind of featured SKUs? Are we looking at brand halo? How does that impact things? Offering multiple attribution windows to be able to cut that data also then allows that to be better contextualized across the board and have a better view of kind of performance that they're looking for. It allows, groups like the Goodway Group and G-Comm to be able to understand, okay, we know this about CVS. How does that work and what does that mean in relationship to some of the other RMNs we're looking at?
Great. Dan?
Yeah, so this ties into how we actively advise our clients on a day-to-day. So where we see a big opportunity is moving from return on ad spend. It's an imperfect metric, and there's some usefulness to it from a day-to-day basis for real-time insights, but we want our brands to focus more on that incrementality, the incremental return on ad spend. So from a network perspective, we really want to see the industry lean into the standards that are in place and to build out robust models that are delivering a measure of effectiveness that is confident and can be interpreted and action upon in a confident way.
That's terrific. And this is, there's some continuity among all of the comments you're making. This has been a really terrific discussion. So as we kind of wind down from the formal part of this webinar, looking for sort of quick takeaways or sound bites from each of you, and we can go in a little bit of a lightning round here, just because Gretchen, you're in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. I'll start with you, but just kind of some best practice advice, a quick takeaway that the listeners and the watchers of this should consider.
Yeah, I think suppliers and agencies are always experts on the brands that they support, but I think it's also super important to be an expert on the retailer if you're going to be looking at that data. There are nuances on those different retail channels, why and how those shoppers are shopping those channels. What is that motivation of why I would buy this brand here versus other places? And really understanding your brand health at the various retailers is also going to inform what your objective should be, which is not going to be the same across all the retailers, due to all of those nuances that are there. So I think it's just important to really have a good understanding, not only of what your brand is doing and be an expert in your brand, but also in the retailers that you're digging into.
Great. Angie, back to you. What's a takeaway
Kind
people
of
should take from you?
kind of expanding on Gretchen's point, I think it's also important for brands to provide transparency back to the retail media network of how they're evaluating their partners. And, again, I think, each retailer has their own nuances, own specialty, and perhaps even different SKUs of audiences. So being able to understand the strengths and weaknesses and the types of audiences and even the halo effect. So if I see an ad online, but I actually walk in store to a different retailer and buying that, there is still some value in giving credit to the first retailer, even though the sale happened in a different retailer.
That's excellent advice. Dan, how about you to start closing this out?
Yeah, so totally agree with Angie and Gretchen. And along the same lines, it's when we work with our brand partners, it's really it's the collaboration to be open to setting a plan and executing on a plan across all the different brands and objectives that they have with them. So and like I said, being open to testing new ideas, testing new things and across the retail spectrum. So we do that at the outset of any relationship that we start with the brand is really sit down, ask them what their objectives are, what the outcomes that they're looking for are, and start with that to hopefully help them build their brand throughout the retail spectrum.
Excellent advice. Collaboration is key, bringing all the stakeholders together to agree on sort of the common purpose and the results that they're looking for. Well, this has been a terrific conversation. I appreciate each of you and thank you for joining us today. Now we're going to open it up. We did take a question in flight, and we're prepared to take any other questions that come up from the audience. Looking in the Q&A right now, and we'll wait a minute to see if any other questions come through. see here. Make sure technology is on our side here. Oh, there is a question. There are a couple of questions coming up. Great. Okay, I have a question first for Gretchen. How is CVS Media Exchange approaching measuring incrementality? This incrementality is a very important buzzword that's coming up quite a bit in the scope of retail media. How do you reduce bias in incrementality measurement? You know, this is the understanding of causality in general. Can you talk a little bit about how CMX is approaching this?
Yeah, sure. I've already talked about our strong loyalty our program. We only target and then measure that same universe of shoppers. So we're only measuring and targeting our loyalty platform, which in itself will reduce bias. And because we have that kind of connection all the way through, then we're not trying to model out to shoppers who maybe aren't loyalty shoppers or may shop at us a little bit more infrequently. We're not making assumptions out of that. We really work within that shopper data. We do a true RCT methodology, have a holdout group where they never have any opportunity to see media, and then able to kind of go through that by balancing out our groups pre and post campaigns between our test and control, so that when we're reporting a sales lift, incremental sales volume and iROAS, that we can feel very confident about that result.
That's really important advice. And actually, that leads to another question. Dan, I'm going to kind of kick this one over to you. You're coaching a client who participates in multiple networks. The differences of how RMNs attribute sales. Can you talk a little bit about how you're coaching them to consider those inputs as you start to build out a measurement solution for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it starts with having our team and sharing that they have expertise across the spectrum and know the nuances between the networks. Um, so to the specific question here, and just flipping over to read it again about the double counting of search and display. So that's where really you have to work with someone who can really dig into the data through the partnership that we could form with the brand to activate at that customer level, to build advanced analytic solutions where you can go to a customer level, determine the exposures across search, across display for a particular network, and then really recreate the attribution in more of a custom fashion to report back more of a unified view of the performance if a particular channel is doesn't have the ability to split out something like a search and display with multiple attribution. So it takes some creativity and some framework that has to be developed to approach those specific questions. And we get them a lot. I mean, there are specific publishers that do have those challenges, and it's some things that our brands have to work through on a daily basis.
Actually, as a nice companion to this from the audience, can you talk a little bit about the media mix modeling and how that can be useful in helping to measure incrementality going forward?
Yeah, and that ties into the first question we had about the CPG brand example. So that's really what we use to really level set the playing field. So when we bring in multiple activity streams from retail networks into something like a media mix model, we can really level set it to one unified type of measurement to determine what channels are working, what channels are not working, and then push that forward into our scenario planner to put real scenarios out there for our brands. If you want to increase conversion or awareness or adoption or trial, how do you change your investment mixes across these different channels? So it starts with MMM because that's the rearward or historical looking part of their performance, and then it needs to be accompanied by some type of forward looking scenario planning or model, so that the brand can accurately plan for the future to achieve the KPIs.
No, that's really super important, and especially when we kind of consider when we're considering sort of now bringing the distance together between digital and in-store. And so I have a question from Tim Hanley. Hi, Tim. I'm going to direct this one to Angie since you're working on sort of a more comprehensive view that includes in-store. Can you talk about some of the metrics that you're hearing from the members of IAB that they want reported on as they think about in-store screens as
Well,
part of their strategy?
well, obviously outcomes is one of them, but I think that's where a lot of the challenges are. There's currently a lot of debates on the likely to see versus the opportunity to see. In fact, again, there was a call yesterday where there were still debates about this, even though we kind of covered it in our papers. But it is really around when it comes to the impact of, regardless of its in-store exposure, or even online category growth, and even product growth. And then as Gretchen mentioned earlier, some of the other things that they've been talking about in terms of incrementality. I mean, that is the biggest issue, is like, if a user is exposed to an ad, is it moving product off the shelf? Am I increasing my share of voice or share of market? And how much, and I would say, what is the long-term value of that consumer? Those are a lot of what the answers that a lot of the questions that they want answered. But also immediately ROAS and ROI. And I think this is, again, where we have to kind of take both the deterministic and probabilistic methods and doing holdout groups, regression models, and so forth, where you're going to have to figure that out. There are several things that aren't tracked that you had mentioned. Search and social will get the credit for. So it's really important to sit down not only with your internal teams about how you assess all these different channels, including in-store, but also with your partners and what are the nuances, because it's not a straight last touch attribution model that should be applied.
Wow, no, that's a good point. And I think in my experience, coming from the data side of the business, thinking about data-driven strategies and the value of that first-party data, we've talked about it here today. Dan, another question for you about thinking about identity specifically. Can you talk about how clients can strengthen their identity foundation as they go into the retail media space?
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking with new clients that are maybe thinking about launching or expanding their retail media network. So it starts with capturing customer data through loyalty programs and partnering with identity resolution providers to enrich that data as well, because there's only so much that can be captured with privacy considerations, but through strategic partnerships with third parties, that data can be enriched to then be able to be activated through DSPs or SSPs to have that network be successful with the brands that are interested in it.
No, that's important, and I'm also seeing a question here about dealing with multiple retail media networks, kind of thinking about how can results be used to drive efficiency, sort of thinking about like the weight of budgets. The idea that if as we approach the standards, there's still some variation that we need to address here, called comparing apples to oranges. Curious on your perspective on that too.
I call it green apples to red apples
Green
because
apples to red apples.
Uh,
um,
yeah, so if the question's for me, so yeah, comparing green apples to red apples, really, it comes down to the expertise of the team that you're working with, that they know who is measuring with green apples, red apples, orange apples, whatever apples that are out there. So it starts with the expertise from the partner that you're working with. To understand those nuances, and really being able to build a measurement plan and a measurement framework that can measure the specific objectives and KPIs that they have, knowing that there are nuances between the different networks and understanding what the networks can report on, and making sure you advise your client to run on networks that can achieve the goals that they want, whether it's acquisition or retention, et cetera, because there will be some nuances to what the best network would be for any particular brand. They don't all offer the same thing, or a broad assortment in some areas of objectives that can be achieved.
That's actually a good follow. There's actually a good follow-up here from the audience as well. And Angie talking about red apples to green apples. Thinking about this future state. We go beyond retail media networks into commerce media networks, sort of new industries beyond traditional retail. Talk a little bit about your perspective and how the IAB is starting to approach handling some challenges to measurement. The question here gets into a little bit of detail about identity and thinking about, commerce media networks exposure to different kinds of advertising without a direct conversion action, but it's part of a chain of events, right, that leads to some kind of a customer journey. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about where the IAB is as they think of future state expanding retail media to commerce media.
Well, I have a remit to solve for cross-channel measurement in the next 12 months, so that's where I'm at now. My focus right now, and everyone's familiar with this phrase, garbage in, garbage out. And unfortunately, I think that in our industry, there is a lot of room for interpretation, as well as we have a lack of standards when it comes to what data is being inputted into platforms by several parties, the buyer as well as the retailer, into their DSPs, into their ad servers, into their DMPs, into their video players, etc. And what we need to ensure is, do we have the right information and the classification of placement, of creative, of campaigns, and structured in a consistent way from platform to platform? And is there the ability to stitch that data across different platforms, right? So I like to say that in our industry, we have this issue where there's always a many to one or one to many kind of thing, where if you're in programmatic or you're an ad ops person, you know that you can give one tag and that could be running across 5 different placements, or you have 5 different placements with 5 different tags within each of them, and it's a mess. So my job, or my focus this year, is what are the best practices around classifying content, classifying creative, classifying campaigns. What are, how do we distinguish between different types of inventory across different types of devices? And so therefore, it's not just the signals that are going through the supply chain, but what is the actual output? And is there any structure to that output that would enable companies to then be able to compare and bring that data set together and spend less time normalizing and transforming that data?
That's terrific. It speaks a lot about where we're going as an industry, and where best practices and standards absolutely apply. Well, coming down to the end of the formal content today, appreciate all of the questions from the group. This has been terrific. Great conversation. I'd like to thank all of the participants. Angie Yang from the IAB. Angie, thank you for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Gretchen Reisner from CVS Media Exchange. Gretchen, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday. And Dan Cinquegrano from Goodway Group G-Comm. Again, fantastic panel, fantastic discussion. We recorded this for posterity, so we'll be able to share. Encourage folks to visit the IAB and learn more about membership and participation. I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways from today, is the opportunity to collaborate and work together for sort of the greater good of retail media and commerce media. Visit CVS Media Exchange brands. Pay note. This is ironclad loyalty. Terrific partnerships abound, and definitely visit G-Comm and the Goodway Group and interact with Dan and our teams to talk more about how we can help you evaluate the results of all of your campaigns. This is Joe.
I just want to add, I want to thank you to both your organizations for all the contribution and participation that you've had in not only the papers that we've been designing and being part of our committees and working groups, but also at our events. So we at the IEP appreciate members like you to help bridge some of the gaps and moving our industry forward.
Oh, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. We're honored to be a part of it. I've been honored to be a part of this and moderate this panel. So again, thank you so much. Look in this space for more details. This has been an awesome experience. Everybody have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.